getting so far out of your comfort zone and doing whatever it took to connect with people, even if you felt self-conscious about how you spoke the language or not really knowing anything about that industry or anything like that. Really just kind of throwing yourself in there. I do think that that made me comfortable with the uncomfortable. The first time I ever went to Nicaragua, I was actually 19 years old. How my parents let me go to Nicaragua at 19. So one day, like years later, I was like, hey, so my Spanish wasn't that great. Yeah, I know we grew up speaking Spanish, but I wasn't as fluent as I am now. And they were like, you were just a very persuasive 19-year-old. Somehow you got us to tell you, like, yeah, you can go. First, having to go travel by yourself where you kind of know the language, you've never been there before. Then on top of that, arriving at the airport and going through customs and them essentially detaining you to be like, you can't leave the airport coming into a foreign country without telling us where you're gonna stay. I was like, I don't know. The guys from Oliva Tobacco told me that they'd be here to pick me up. And they're like, that's not good enough. But then I was like, please, if you just let me go over to the window and actually just see if there's somebody there. Of course, I don't know anybody because there's a stranger coming to pick me up. And there was a name that would kind of look like it was Matt Hunt. So I was like, look, that's my guy. He's here to pick me up. So then finally they let me go and I went with a stranger and somehow I ended up at cigar factories in every business, whether it be sauces that I had never done before, cigars at 19 that I never really had done before. It prepared me and here we go. So let's start more adventures. Grew up in a Cuban household. My mom was Cuban, dad was American. I've never not identified as a Cuban. It wasn't a natural step into the cigar world. I mean, I know it's stereotypical, but honestly, neither of my parents smoked, neither of my parents drank, and that was just kind of came out of left field just because I got into it. I had a lot of older relatives that they were very old-fashioned. Like there was a Cuba before the revolution that was prime times 1940s, 1950s. Like this was the dream. This was the time that you wanted to live in Cuba. And that's the generation that they were. And they were the type of people that would just very prim and proper, sit down, would always have like their afternoon coffees, and then they would have light dinners and then smoke outside, and then just were never too loud, were never too any of these different things, but always looked like they were on point. Always made sure that everybody was very respectful. It was the type of thing that even growing up, my mom would tell stories of her grandfather of nobody sat down at the table until the grandfather sat down. And just like hearing those kind of stories and kind of being romanticized into what used to be, that's always been, I've been a big fan of like the gentleman lifestyle and just persona for a long, long time. The Nat King Coles and the Frank Sinatras and the Dean Martins, and that's kind of what gets you into it. And you carry yourself a certain way. And that's of course like how they dress and how that makes you feel. And that made you start being like, okay, well, like what were those people like? Because obviously, I mean, it's not that the clothes that make you a gentleman. It's not the clothes that you're like, oh, hey, that's what's gonna make it. No, there's more to it. When I first started cigars, I used to be the suit guy. I was always the kid in the suit. I was 19 years old. I had to do something a little bit different because at that time, everybody was like, it was all about the streetwear and how can I be kind of outside the box. And then I was like, oh, I'll be the 100-year-old man in a 19-year-old body. I was like, that's a jam. But then as you start learning about business and different things like that, it's like you can't wear a suit at every meeting that you go to or every time you interact with people. Just because you might shut off a tie, might shut off a coat, that doesn't mean that you change who you are. That doesn't mean that you change your person as a character. And that was like, I do think that the culture of being around some, like people that were old-fashioned, and I think that Hispanic culture is old-fashioned, for better or for worse. In my case, I think it was for the better. Empathy is the biggest thing. Like people will sometimes ask, like, "Oh, what's the one thing that you'd really want to teach your children?" Whether it be boy, girl, that doesn't matter. I think that empathy, being able to relate to people, make people feel that you're in it with them, even though you have nothing in your history that you can ever relate to. I think that sometimes people want that. Granted, it'll never be the same as, oh, I've been through it with you. But if you can console somebody, whether it be anything, whether even it's being like that, they have a different political view, if they have a different religious view, it's more to be like, I can empathize that this is how you grew up, this is how you feel, this is that you think that you're right. It's like, that to me is the biggest thing. It doesn't matter what you're wearing at that point. It doesn't matter what you're looking at that point. The biggest thing is just being open to other ideas. That's probably the most gentlemanly thing I can think of because, and as I'm sure everybody in the room and everybody watching can tell, these days it's definitely lost. That people can't have opinions without respecting somebody else's. Anytime I get the opportunity that I talk to somebody, whether it be a stranger or not, and they just show a little bit of their passion, that gets me hype. That gets me like, oh man, tell me all the things. Like, let's brainstorm. And this could be a stranger on the street. I mean, imagine you meet so many people at cigar shops, people at restaurants, and that's honestly the best, right? If you get to meet other people and you can kind of vibe with them and really start talking about what makes them passionate, that's what I find passionate. Unless you feel strongly about what you're creating and you feel pride in what you're creating, then you're never gonna make it. You gotta feel like, okay, this is my name on this product. And the only way to make the very best product is to know what's out there, know what's not out there, and execute on that. Apparel it makes you feel a certain way so that you can present yourself in a certain way. And whether that apparel be for one person, when they have awesome sweatpants and an awesome sweatshirt on, if that empowers them to like feel a certain way to be able to execute their idea or execute their plan, I think that's great. On the other end, I'm the type of guy that I'm old fashioned. I like the white shirt, I like the slacks, I like the jacket, I like the whole thing. That's always made me feel a certain kind of way. You guys ever hear of like imposter syndrome? So it's like the whole concept of like, oh man, you feel like, oh, I could just be wearing a jacket, it's not really me. I think in the beginning, especially when you're young, that you have that choice. You can be anything. You can decide like, I'm a suit guy now. Or you could be like, hey, I'm a Madewell shoe guy. You can be whatever you want it to be. And it's really, nobody's gonna question on if you're that thing or not. It's how committed are you to being that person? And that's one thing, like when it first came out with cigars, when I was doing that, buddy, I committed. I am a gentleman because I care about other people.